Hey, what's going on, everybody? It is my good friend Jonathan Pishner of Apex Counseling and myself, Jerry, the East Coast Viking Hanley here, coming at you Monday morning this time around. Normally these are Friday early afternoon, but schedules are what schedules are. So this is brought to you by bald heads, beards, black shirts, and coffee today. So
Black
just
coffee.
Yes, exactly. So we are matching in always pretty much right now. So today's topic, perfect one actually to start the week, especially if you're catching this live. I think really start the week off positively is creating a joyful state, and just both in terms of specific moments, but then also just an ideally like just better all around mental state for yourself to go on and just live your life with for both yourself and for others. So I want to go ahead and hand it over to JP a little bit. He'll give us some feedback and let's get going.
So I'm going to curveball it immediately,
Awesome.
uh, because one of the misconceptions about having like joy in your life and really high levels of happiness is a lot of people accidentally believe that it's achievable to make that like your 95% of the time state. And sadly, for most people, it's not. And they end up with an expectation that since they end up with the expectation that it is, they end up very dissatisfied. But we have a wonderful advantage that is actually a big disadvantage when it comes to happiness. Our advantages are our adaptability. Human beings can adapt to horrifying circumstances. It's what's allowed us to survive and thrive for so long. You can put us in the middle of the desert. You can put us in the middle of the Arctic. You can make it so we can eat nothing but grass and tree bark, and we will adapt and survive. But just in the same way that we can adapt to a lot of misery and be okay, all of the things that make us happy, if we don't know how to design it well, we'll adapt to those and return to what's essentially a baseline state. Matter of fact, everyone watching this or listening to this knows somebody that's like this. They made a change in their life. They were intensely happy about it for a while, and then they returned to whatever their baseline state is. Hopefully, some level of contentedness, but some people's baseline is depression. And so, if you know that and you know that that's coming, there's a lot you can do to work within it to really create a lot of joyful moments and maximize everything. If you don't know that's coming, then you usually think you did something wrong because you're like, I was happy last week. Why am I not happy this week? Not realizing that our adaptability caused you to adapt to your pleasant circumstances.
Man, that was a good solid curveball. I think for most people, that was a lot, but I'm glad you went right into that because yeah, I agree with you. I feel like so many people do think of joy as almost like a noun. Like they almost think it's just this thing that I have or I do not have. And I guess in some ways, I mean, you could make an argument that it is with chemical reactions or whatever. But I think a lot of people do miss out on the fact that they have how much control they really have over it. Like I'm a huge Viktor Frankl fan, just in terms of like the works he's had, and I might butcher the quote, which makes me really sad. But I'll always remember the part where he says, between action and reaction, there is a gap, there is space, and in that space, you get to choose how you want to respond, or between stimulus and action. That's what it is. Um, but like that's a key ingredient. I feel a lot of times is no matter what happens, like whether it's things going well or surprises, you do have some capacity to decide exactly how you're going to take it and how you're going to react and move forward with it. And people think of that in terms of negative things a lot. Like even if they've heard that at all or they have heard just the idea, negative things happen, and like people might think, okay, so supposedly I'm supposed to be able to take this negative thing, stop and think about it, decide how I'm going to let it affect me and move on. And that part's true. But people don't realize that's also an option during positive things, which I feel is like goes hand in hand with what you're saying. Like they don't realize like, okay, I'm having this really positive or just this good moment happen. I can choose to like in essence make this more like a make this a feeling I'm going to appreciate longer while it's here, and maybe try to actually make it more consistent and more frequent while it's here, and not take it for granted, appreciate it, but then try to make more of these rather than thinking that they have no control over it whatsoever.
Yeah, that's right. Although there's a few missing building blocks that I'm now going to fill in because if you've already found that neurocircuitry and you can just do that, that's terrific. What a lot of people struggle with is that they have not yet located that ability within their brain to use their thoughts to impact their emotions. So let's get more basic for a second,
Yes.
because there's a lot of ways to to work with this that really help. And matter of fact, you're coming off of one of them already. Uh, One of the things that causes us to be able to access joy a little more easily, because our system is adaptational, right? Well, part of it's giving stuff we haven't yet adapted to. You were just telling me how amazing this conference was. You go to conferences, what, a time or two a year?
It's been 4 or 5 lately, the last few
Okay,
years.
but even so, you have not yet had the opportunity to adapt fully to that experience.
Right.
And so when you get done with a conference, you always come back in an elevated state, and that elevated state lasts for probably some days, I would guess.
It really does. And what I'm finding too is that so for me, a lot of that elevated state comes from the people and the connections I'm making and the
Mhm.
relationships that I'm making, because um, we are mostly like-minded people going to these conferences, which I think is one key part of this. Just the more like-minded people you can find, the better. But also the longer we plan on staying in contact, pretty much immediately afterwards, helps prolong that state. If this was a conference where I went in, got information, had a good time, but then came back and went just immediately back into my just pure environment and only spoke to my pure environment, the feeling from the conference would be shorter. But if the fact that I know I'll be staying in touch and already have plans to with several of the people that I was there with, I believe are going to like prolong that feeling of just basically that just amped up feeling from it.
You are. It is going to prolong it. So building block number one is the novelty. Uh, so that's a thing that's replicatable for people. Now, building block number two that you're talking about is you have positive anticipation. Positive anticipation is actually another type of joyful state.
Mm.
It creates its own problem, by the way, later. But whenever it's happening, positive anticipation is essentially a joyful state because it elevates not only your emotional state, but oftentimes the physiology. My guess would be that when you were getting ready to buy your house, you would often find yourself in a physiologically elevated state, right?
Mhm. Yep.
And that's basically what you were essentially in a joyful state. Oh man, I'm going to go get this house because you were in a positive anticipatory state. So you had the novelty, number one, buying house or going to conference. Number two, positive anticipation, still buying house, or in the case of the conference, oh, now I'm going to go get to do this other thing based off of it. So if we pause there and don't add any more building blocks yet, I want to make this practically usable. I can't stand to leave things and not have them be practically usable. So
It's one of the things I
if you
love.
forget, what's that?
One of the things I love about you. But go
Yeah.
ahead.
So for the people listening, if you forget everything else and all you can do is work on novelty and positive anticipation, it's going to help a lot because if we remember, the joyful state can't be maintained long term. It's going to have spikes, then it goes away, and it spikes again. You can get a lot out of just those two things, and I bring them up first because they're the easiest to access.
Ooh.
Almost anyone has the opportunity to add something novel to their life, to have something that they can positively anticipate. All the other stuff we're going to talk about starts to require more skill and requires practice, and you've actually got to put some work into it. These first two you got to put a little effort into, but your brain and body will basically make them happen because the physiology helps working with it.
Got like a little piece to add on the side, actually. And I'm curious where this comes up in like in your practice, or if is I remember coming across some research or articles on research, because I'm not the guy reading research, but it was like articles about it just like it was a few years ago, but not that long ago, but about novelty actually, and it was talking about the perception of a longer life, and it brought up how people feel like they have longer lives when they have more novel experiences because of how the brain basically when you're in again like there's all the positive aspects to routine, but your brain goes through them faster in a way, time wise, like because when it does the same thing. But when it has a lot of new experiences, it remembers those, it makes like so many thousands more of impressions on itself while it's filing away this new experience. And so as a result, it remembers more. It seems like it was around more, and thus it feels like time spreads out. It's basically like days almost feel longer, years feel longer, but in a positive way, I guess. Like, I mean, it could be negative too. I never thought about it,
Yeah.
but yeah, but just like how that sense of novelty is actually wired into that with time. So, you get to a certain point in life, you're like, oh man, where have all these years gone? Like the more like you can actually change that in a way, or at least, not when you're there, maybe, but you can take actions to make that feeling as positive as possible for you in the future by adding more novel actions to your day and to your week, month, whatever.
Yeah, that would make sense. I didn't realize somebody had researched it, but that makes perfect sense to me because you have essentially more memory anchor points.
That's it.
Um,
Yeah.
because like before I got on here, I was just entering some billing. I promise you, that is not a memory anchor point for me. I am that is exactly the same as every Monday morning. But anything that's novel, yeah, it'll make it feel like more of your life is accessible in your memory because you have different stuff to go to, and it's not just the
Mhm.
same old thing. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm glad somebody researched it.
Yeah, like it was really cool to read when that came up. And one more before we go into some of the deeper things. So when we talk about the positive states, like or the anticipation that you brought up. So how do you think this is kind of involved in terms of people creating winning streaks for themselves when things just seem to be, because I feel like, you get that positive anticipation and then you get positive feedback when something goes well. And then, like sometimes that can create that feeling of positive momentum, and it just feels like you're like again, just things are going well. You're creating little wins for yourself, whether it be just small daily things or in business, whatever. And you just get on those positive steps. Like each one's kind of boosting the next.
That's a good question because that is now that you're saying it, that I would definitely add that to my techniques list for how to create some joy. Here's the important if. This is where individual differences become so important.
Mm-hmm.
If that person is not highly sensitive to losing. Because if you
Oh,
get on a win streak, but you're highly sensitive to losing, you're not going to be excited about the next win. You're going to be terrified that the win streak ends.
that makes
Uh,
sense.
so, like for the
Cool.
for the person who's cool with it, just like loss, whatever, and goes on. Absolutely, win streak would be wonderful for joy because they're much more sensitive to like, aha, I beat that. Now I'm going to get this next thing. But if it's the other way, it won't work.
Ooh, yeah, I'm not kidding. That gives me like chills thinking about being in that situation. Like, ugh. All right.
And what a wonderful example. I'm so glad you asked that question because that highlights so nicely how each person has to really experiment with how to create joyful states for themselves.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a big part of this conversation is they're like, yeah, like we all know people, maybe we are, who seem to just be able to like keep it going. They don't let losses or just negative experiences hold them down too long, then go back up. And then we know people who can have a streak, like you said, but then that something bad happens and it's look like it's back to normal. It's like it's
Yep.
something like that. So all right, so you wanted to talk about some of the deeper levels of this.
Yeah, yeah. So I realized after we did our last one that maybe we should have put these in a different order because one of the skills that is used for joyful state stuff actually is gratitude, and we just did our one on gratitude. Uh, but what the practice of gratitude does, and if you didn't listen to or watch that, I encourage you to go do so after this one if you think it would help. Gratitude provides a reset, maybe not reset, but I can't think of a better word right now. A reset to your adaptational system because one of the things about the practice of being in an elevated, happy state, whether you call it joy or anything else, is that you somehow view what is happening right now as a very good or excellent thing, you're able to at least find something good in it. The practice of gratitude is essentially the practice of doing just that, whether circumstances are particularly terrific or not. In our talk before, we talked about things like, me being a student of history, I'll look at running water and be like, this is so amazing.
Mhm.
But for other people, it'll be different stuff. But that resets your adaptational system to a certain degree, because you're no longer viewing the present moment as normal. You're viewing it as something better than what it could be. You're essentially doing a I don't like using technical terms if I don't have to, but in this case, it's easier to say it with the technical term. It's called a negative counterfactual. Counterfactual is just something that is not presently true, and a negative is a worse one that is presently true. So negative counterfactual would be, oh well, okay, I like having a house, and I've definitely lived in situations that's way worse than having my own house. Therefore, I'm resetting my adaptational system to that previous baseline where I can come to enjoy my house again. And I'm not viewing that as the way the world is supposed to be, and just now viewing it as normal. I feel like I went on for a minute, but hopefully that all made sense.
No, it does, and I actually feel like I had some of that. I was like purposely, or like realized I was going through that or doing that more this weekend as well. Actually, like while traveling, things like that. And I do think, again, I think it was a mixture of these things we're talking about. One, because I was leaving town, going to an event, it already had that bonus of being a more novel experience. Whether I've done it before or not, it was more novel than the daily routine. So it made me more aware of these things. And then just adding to that, I was in a more gratitude state of mind, because I've just been trying to focus on that in general. And it was almost like I was taking the more silent moments, whether they were silent noise or not, but I was just taking the quieter moments, and that's when I would realize some of those things. And it was just like you said, it was taking the idea of like this, like quiet, this peace, this moment could be way worse. Like you said, like the fact that we're able to do this quiet and this peace is pretty cool. Like I said, whether it was just simply, like, hey, I called an Uber, like I scheduled an Uber to pick me up like last night, and he's here like on the minute, and I get to just get in this car and do what I want to do for the next 40 minutes while he takes me to the airport or the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. Like, would actually think about that, like, oh, and again, like that can so easily go into that just basic task, something you do to be set up, okay, move on. But just actually being aware of that as something that's pretty cool that we can actually do. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
yeah, like this is awesome.
and me being me, I'll throw a little extra positive spin on it to even more emphasize it. I just ordered a personal driver from the internet. Look how amazing my life is.
It's like exactly. Yeah, yeah. So like, there's so much of that to go through with it. Like, what do you think in terms of one of the things that I think I see a lot of people struggle with this the most is, there's a lot of long-term programming that we're all going through, like in so much, and a
And we're
lot of
fighting
it.
it all the time.
Exactly. Like, we start long-term programming, there are years of it before we even have a chance to affect it on our own. Like, like
Mm-hmm.
before we have anything of that. So when it comes to those long-term programs that tend to be on the more negative side, like what can these people do? Like, what are some of those basic action steps to try to get them up a little bit longer, a little bit more frequently?
What tell you what, you
We
gotta
already
you got to know that you and I have different things in your head, because when we talk about negative long-term programming, based on what I do, you got to know that I'm thinking of some of the worst negative long-term
Oh,
programming you can even
no.
think of. So maybe give me an example and get me to
Like,
where you are.
just kind of the basic example I said a few minutes ago of just like somebody who is more sensitive to having a little bit more negative perception of like what the world is doing to them or their role in the world, and is just simply a little bit more on the depressed side. Like I said, nothing.
Okay, so somebody who will tend perhaps just to notice the negative more is what
Yes.
you're
Yep.
saying, but not with like the
Maybe
deep
think that
level
they're
like.
at fault more. Like, either they think it's bad luck or they're actually at fault more often. Again, just
Actually, you know what? Let me get on the bad luck one. That's a nice, relatively simple one, because if we're thinking of somebody who wants to program for a joyful state, but really easily views things through the lens of bad luck. Uh, in a way, that's what's called an external locus of control. I'm breaking out all the big technical terms today. I guess I don't know, but an external locus of control is when you view the world as being responsible for your results and for your state, instead of you being responsible for them.
Mhm.
Now, real talk, yes, it is a very complex combination of both, but for the purpose of programming for a joyful state, you're trying to assume that as many things in your life are under control as is reasonably possible. So you would be attempting to view things as like you having a good job is under your control in some form or fashion, you being able to live where you want to live, those kind of things. And so a lot of it's trying to view things as within your control to some reasonable extent. And then mostly trying to find something of value in whatever you're doing to move towards the life you want, which is let's keep it easy on like the job level. I hate my job, but oh, okay, well, I see that I put in 7 applications today. I'm at least doing something and finding some level of gratitude in that, finding some level of internal control with that. That programs a little more clearly for a joyful state that you can control, as opposed to one that just happens to you. Like if you throw out one application and your dream job comes along, like congratulations, we're all happy for you, and you'll be happy for a little while. But you also are kind of reinforcing that external locus of control, which is less good. So trying to bring everything under your control as much as possible is part of it. But I recognize there's a second half of this where, as I'm saying this, the idea of that is very burdensome to some people. The idea of, oh my God, my life sucks and now I have to control it all. So I'm saying that with the recognition that some people are going to be able to utilize that for a joyful state, and some people are going to struggle with that.
Mhm. That makes sense. And thinking about it, like I mean, I see like one of the harder ones is like one of the harder ones that would seem to me, but in basic cases, again, not like extremes that really need that individual attention, but is people who haven't almost, we've all heard like one step forward, two steps back, two steps forward, one step back, those types of things. But where some people have more of a tendency to, as they crawl forward, whenever that one thing happens, they want to go back to the reset. They almost want to almost to where they're like subconsciously or even consciously undoing good things they've done or wins that they had to get themselves back in the original state so that they can say, "Oh, look, nothing ever works for me." Like,
Well, that's not even programming for joy. That's a whole separate.
I was gonna say, like, I mean, that just idea just came to mind as you were talking about that. I was like, man, that's the thing there. Well, I know one thing we did want to talk about is actually taking this and now going extreme, an extreme in a good way. Is we had talked previously about like cloud 9 moments or just like
Yeah.
moments,
Well,
and
tell you what. Before you jump to that, let me give one more
yeah,
practical thing to program for joy, because I realized this after we had talked, and I was like, oh shoot, I'm going to start doing this maybe. Um, so one of the Stoic philosophers, I think it was Seneca. I hope it was, because I'm going to feel silly if I got it wrong. Uh, was a big fan of doing with less. And he had some quote that I really should have looked up before here, but it said basically every once in a while, do without all your fancy stuff,
oh
all your
yeah,
nice food and your fancy clothes and stuff, and just do with the bare minimum for existence. And he proposed that as a way to wellness. And after we were thinking about this talk and I was thinking about adaptational systems, I realized there's something to that. That's a reasonably easy behavioral path to reset the adaptation system for joyful stuff. So you take things like, a lot of religions have practices where they do without for a while, Lent, Ramadan, a couple of others. You go without, say, meat for 40 days or however long it is. Man, you crack into that first steak after that. That's a joyful experience.
mm.
I didn't realize, and I didn't mean to. I apparently do this, but I didn't actually set it up as a joyful thing. It's really just more of a money saving thing. But throughout the week, I drink coffee that is caffeine, and then on the weekend, I drink the nice coffee that is more expensive that I like the taste of.
Oh,
But on the weekend, that cup of coffee is way more joyful to me because I've gone without that and kind of reset my adaptational system and just drinking my Folgers Instant. So I wasn't meaning to, but I was accidentally setting up for a little joyful state in some stuff. And the more you can do those kind of little behavioral practices to reset the adaptation system, that's a reasonably easy way to create extra spikes of joy, as long as here's the key part, because people tend to overdo it anytime you give them a system. As long as the going without is not horrible. So I drink the Folgers Instant. That's not horrible to me. It's fine. Just the other stuff is so much better. But if the idea of going without a certain thing is like horrifying, that's no good. That's too far of a move in the other direction. You just want to kind of reset what your neutral is so that the good stuff is better. So I wanted to both give that behavioral tool for joyful state, but also make that point of not accidentally overdoing the whole going without bit.
yeah, that was huge. I'm so because that is exactly the type of thing that anybody listening to this can take and use. Because I mean, you just took like the basic reward system and like basically just took a different perspective on it and realized how that reward system can actually be used to create those joyful moments regularly and more often, just like
Mm-hmm.
you said. And especially, I really like that addition at the end too. Like you said, is like especially when it's not necessarily about taking something away from yourself that you enjoy, but giving yourself regular intervals of things you enjoy a little bit more, and then you appreciating and going through. Like, yeah, that's so good. And like you said, like that's so many things people can do with that, whether it's something like coffee or different types of meals, like heck, eating like yeah, whether it's eating out on a weekend at their favorite place, or I mean, heck, this can be like a family TV show or like something like that. Everybody
Oh
like, likes to
yeah.
do like yeah, like just you know, like hey, let's have like Sunday's our night to watch this, or like Tuesday movie night, like whatever
Mhm.
it is. Like it can be like, man, there's so many, like there's endless examples that can be used for. So I'm really glad you thought about that and brought it up.
Yeah, I'm glad I noticed that
Yeah.
because
And without knowing for sure, that definitely sounded like a Seneca thing, like that. So I
yeah.
suspect that being Seneca. And actually, I was ruffling over here because the Seneca quote I wrote down from my conference this weekend was, yeah, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. And again, that's achievement based, but kind of just that whole idea that if we take our life and use it in general is to try to have more joyous states, more joyous moments. There's a lot, and as that ties right back to the no matter how long your life actually is, the more of those novel, positive experiences you give it, like the better it'll seem.
Now, before we go to cloud nine, I'm gonna point something out because I always hesitate to bring up stuff that's fads in psychology, just because people get resistant to anything that's become a fad. But you'll notice one of the things that it encourages, each of these things we've talked about encourages, whether it's novelty or whether it's these adaptational resets, or even what you were talking about with using your thoughts. There's a certain level of combination here. Everything is some version of a mindfulness practice, and that's actually one of the easiest ways to start accessing joy is to do different types of mindfulness practices, because one of the reasons we have trouble getting into a joyful state and staying there for any length of time is because we'll easily get into the past or the future very quickly. So I mostly bring that up to say to people, if you want to do the more complicated version of this and really like get a lot of ability to have much more joyful spikes and let them stick around longer, different types of mindfulness practices are going to be really important. But that's the thing that takes a lot of practice. You can't, you're not going to do a yoga class once and suddenly be able to maintain joyful states longer. So that's a long-term play if you really want to get into it, is to find some mindfulness practice that you work on for months and years.
Yep. And make sure I wrote myself a note that I was not going to let myself forget from that. It's okay. So just a few weeks ago, I don't even remember if it was in the talk or maybe before or after one of our talks, but we were talking about how with moments, like there's, part of the psychology of it is we tend to remember experiences by their peak, whether it's the peak best or the peak worst, and also by how it ended. And when we're talking, so I personally feel like that's going to be one of the bigger tools kind of for these cloud nine experiences that we're about to talk about. But again, in cloud nine, it's unofficial name for just a term that's been used for I don't know how long. I have no idea where that came from, but it's like, but just that feeling of like where it's just like it's like the elevated.
Let's call it a peak experience.
Yes, just that peak experience. Like everything feels amazing. Like there's just an almost sense of like joy plus elation. Maybe think something like that. Like it's just like that super high. Everything feels like has come together to create this a moment, this amazing like moment and experience for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things I said that to at least some degree you can kind of manufacture. And again, you can't just necessarily conjure one out of thin air most of the time, but knowing the science of our thoughts with moments, you can create these more often. So
Mm-hmm.
what would be some ways you would say like to help people do that? Like actually try to create these for themselves or their family, or whatever.
And let's say that usually creating them from scratch is difficult, but you can nudge something from being a
Oh
mediocre
yes.
experience to being a peak experience somewhat easily. Let's do a simple one. Let's take a vacation, especially one that has some novelty to it. So the thing that really helps a lot is making sure that that you have a clear best experience in the vacation, whatever it is. Maybe it's going to a fancy dinner, maybe it's doing something you've never done before. Some people go to the beach and try surfing for the first time, or do one of the things where they drag you by a boat, but you have a parachute on, so you're basically flying. Who knows? So having like a peak experience within the vacation experience, and then the end being good. Because what'll happen is, if everything's good but then the ending is messed up, our brain will tend to prioritize the peak experience and the ending. So I'll tell you the sad thing that a lot of families do to accidentally mess up what would have otherwise been a peak experience vacation. They have a pretty good vacation, and then they'll come home, and I don't know, something's just like, and they're tired and they're not thinking, and one of them says, "Why didn't you do the dishes before we left?" And like, I just want to run tackle somebody before they have a chance to say that,
Oh,
because through just not knowing to keep your mouth shut for another, I don't know, like 3 hours, and let the vacation experience fully end, you accidentally now have created that the end cap on the vacation is you made a complaint. And now you've taken what could have been a peak experience and made it at best mediocre, if not slightly negative. So really, you can do the opposite. If you go, I mean, let's say you go to Cedar Point every year, which is a nice place. I love roller coasters, but maybe you've gotten used to it, that you've adapted, and that's no longer a peak experience. Well, all you got to do to nudge that back into a peak experience is make sure there's something in the middle that happens that's really great. Maybe it's new roller coaster, maybe ride it in the front. If you never ride it in the front, who knows? I mean, there's a million ways to create a peak experience. And then make sure it ends well. Maybe you've been on vacation with your family enough times. Maybe you know that like by the end of 5 days, everybody's too tired. Maybe you decide, all right, this time we're going to try ending it at 3.5 and see if the ending wraps up right. Maybe maybe it's as simple as that. And but the two key points is middle experience, that's the peak, and the end. If you get those two right, you can nudge what would have otherwise been a good experience into an actual lifetime peak experience, because your brain will remember it that way.
and then if you do that and it is something you're likely to start doing or try to do every once in a while, you create yourself an additional positive anticipation experience. Like, man, I can't wait till the
Oh,
next
yeah.
year when we get to go.
I
So
didn't think of that, but yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so I mean that gives you like, and when you if you have even a few of those, like talking a lot about personal and family right now, but if you have even a few of those to look forward to like every year, I feel like you're in a pretty good spot. Like, but to take that and to kind of go into the wrapping up period too, that's something you can do for, it doesn't have to be just you or your family. Like that's something you can create in business. In fact, it's very key in like some key business experiences, or other situations. Like I'll tell you right now, for example, here at the gym, like, we try to have good experiences all the time, but one thing that's like baked into our system is testing or max weeks or things like that. Like, there, like science will tell you, like sports science, will tell you that you don't need to have max out weeks necessarily unless you're like a max out type of athlete every once in a while. And then they might also say like once or twice a year. These are very frequently more aimed for the coach, saying like, okay, you don't need to see where they're at that often or get like true maximal capabilities. That because we can see when someone's improving or not, whether we have max numbers or not. Again, like unless they happen to be a max athlete, like a power lifter, that's like literally, or a weightlifter, like the only exception. But like people love seeing progress, and especially like if we're talking say athletes and kids, they love seeing themselves jump higher. They love seeing that their vertical went up 3.5 inches in the last 2 months or something like that. So at the end of every one or two phases, we typically do put in those assessment weeks, like let them see how their jumps improve, let them do
Mhm.
some specifically heavy lifts. All these things are there. So yeah, we can see what they're hitting, but it's mostly for them. Like it is like 100% for them, not even mostly.
Sure.
That is for them so they can see how their work is being paid off.
Well, and that's good psychology because what you're doing is you're literally showing them their new baseline and comparing it against what is now the negative counterfactual, which is their old baseline, because that's
Mhm.
no longer real. Now their new baseline's real. That comparison is one of the things that easily creates joy. So yeah, that's good psychology. That's terrific.
Exactly. Thank you. It's like, yeah. But yeah, like, these are things that we can all do, whether it is family, business, I mean, community, if you have the means and you like people, throw parties at your house,
Yeah.
um, but again, my man, wrap it up. So I'll let you go ahead and do your bullet point style finish here.
I can't stand not to at this point. So if you're going to deploy this and attempt to create more joyful states, then novelty is easy. The more novelty you have, the more easy it is to create those slightly peaked states of happiness. Positive anticipation, finding stuff that you're able to positively anticipate. Those are your two easiest ones. Taking a period of doing slightly without something, so you reset your adaptational baseline, and then once you add it back in temporarily, it's a little better. We use the example of different foods and stuff, but there's 100 ways to do this, as long as that you doing without isn't in some way too much of a stretch or harmful or in some form or fashion. Uh, you and utilizing thoughts to kind of bring yourself into a state of gratitude for what you're experiencing here in the present moment. That's another path to joyful state. So in any of these, really, you're going to have to experiment a lot if you want these to work. Like we're lobbing a few bullet points at you and be like, oh yeah, just do this. But this one's one, if you want it to work, it's going to take some experimentation and practice to make it go. Like me and Jerry have both been on journeys to continually improve ourselves for, I don't know, let's just call it both around decade at least. So anyone starting this off, it's going to be hard at first. It's not going to be as easy as we make it sound. We're just trying to make it as simple as we can so that you can use it.
Exactly. So, all right, my man. Great talk with you as always. I think this is a really good one. It's going to help people out a lot with things that are honestly quite important, and that's just having that joy. It's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, joy is important. Who knew?
All right, everybody. We'll catch you guys later. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. And meanwhile, have a great time.